Welcome to another episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Player Ranks. In this series, we rank various Yu-Gi-Oh! Themes based on your comments and suggestions. Come back every tier list Tuesday to see an all-new installment of this series. Alright, what's up guys? We are back with another tier list. Today I'm doing a very exciting one. It is the God cards. These are some of the most iconic cards in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Obviously, Battle City was probably the best season of Yu-Gi-Oh! Period. I mean, it was so iconic. It was so much fun to watch. You never knew what was going to happen. There was always so much going on. And yeah, we're reviewing the boss monsters from that saga, the God cards, and also if there's anything that you guys want to see, any upcoming tier lists you want to see, let me know in the comment section down below. Also, there is a playlist now for all of these tier lists, so if you want to watch them in consecutive order, throw them on while you're at work or you're doing schoolwork or something, you could throw them on. That playlist is available, but let's not waste too much time. Let's get started. First off, we've got Egyptian God Slime. So this card, basically, I'd say it's a fairly good card. It essentially, all it requires is a level 10 water aqua monster, and you can essentially just contact fuse directly from that one monster into this thing. This thing is actually pretty good. It basically allows you to tribute summon a god card with just it, so it can be all three tributes required for a god card tribute summon with just this, and then you can essentially normal summon any god card you want, and you don't have to lose it at the end phase, and you can actually summon the Winged Dragon of Ra. So that is actually pretty cool. Also, it has some other effects where it can't be destroyed by battle, and then your opponent cannot target other monsters you control for attacks, and it cannot target other monsters you control for card effects. So it has a little bit of protection, a little bit of kind of like weirdish protection, but generally speaking, it's a pretty good card. It has good stats. It triggers the effect of the Guardian Slime, and it allows the trap card, the Metal Reflect Slime, to actually have a use. It's not just a defense position monster that does nothing. So within the context of the deck, it's actually a fairly good card. I'd say the only issue with it is it's outside of those two cards, it can be a bit tough to summon sometimes. I'd say probably, in terms of Egyptian God support, I'd say it's pretty good. It's probably like an A tier card. Next up, we've got Angel 01. This card was released in the Structure deck, which is, yeah, the God card starter decks. This card, I'd say, is okay. It basically lets you reveal a level 7 or higher monster, and then you can special summon this card, and if this card's on the field, you have an extra normal summon, extra tribute summon of a monster that's level 7 or higher. I actually don't think this card is that good in a God card deck. It actually is much better in, if you wanted to do a Christia Turbo deck or something like that. I think it'd be a lot better. So I'm going to put it in D tier. I don't think it's actually that good in this deck. Yeah, it's not that. It's just not as useful. Next is Telos, the Little Angel. This card, I'd say it's really not bad, but I still wouldn't play it. But it's much better than this other card, than the Angel 07. Basically, if this card's sent from the monster zone to the graveyard, you can special summon a token, and then if you banish a spell card and this card from the graveyard, you can summon 2 more of those tokens as long as you control a token. So basically, it gives you 3 monsters, and that really isn't that bad because there's a little combo that you can do. You can normal summon this, link it away for All Mirage, and then you can get a token and then activate the graveyard effect, banish a spell card, get another 2 tokens, and then you can tribute summon for any god card you want, assuming you have an additional tribute summon, which this deck gives you a ton of additional tribute summons. So this card really isn't that bad. You basically have an All Mirage plus a god card that has protection from All Mirage, because you contribute All Mirage and then protect the god card. So it's really not too bad. I'd say it's probably somewhere around C tier. It's not the best option out there, but I'd say middle of the road is a fair placement for this. Next is Ra's Disciple. Now, Ra's Disciple isn't a bad card. Basically, it lets you on summon, normal or special summon 2 more Ra's Disciples, and then the only thing you can do with them is tribute them for Slifer, Ra, or Obelisk. Those are the only things you can do with them. You can't link them away. You can't do anything else with them but those things. And while it's on the field, you essentially can't do anything. You can't summon in any way unless you're summoning those guys. That lock is actually pretty scary sometimes, especially if you don't have an access to a god card. Some of the god cards aren't as searchable as others, so I would say and the other issue with this card is it's actually been power crept. So while it's not, at some point it wasn't that bad of a card, now that it's power crept, I wouldn't play it. So I'd probably put it I'd say it's probably near this Tealus guy. It's probably somewhere around there. Next is Reactor Slime. Reactor Slime is actually the card that power crept Ra's Disciple. Basically what this card does is allows you during the main phase to special summon 2 slime tokens, and then for the rest of the turn you can't normal or special summon monsters except divine monsters, which is fine because you're playing a god card deck, so it doesn't really matter. And then so that basically replaces the effect of the Ra's Disciple. It already like power creeps it. It's better than Ra's Disciple in almost every single way. But on top of that, it has an additional effect. Also, you don't have to play the bricks in decks. Like Ra's Disciple only summons other Ra's Disciples from the hand or deck. This thing can summon just 2 tokens out of nowhere, so you don't have to play the additional bricks. So if you draw like 2 copies, it's not like an added brick in your hand. It's not, you know, if one's in the graveyard, you kind of brick. With this thing, they're generating tokens, so it doesn't really matter. The other effect that it has is during the battle phase, you can set a Metal Reflex Slime, which is the 3000 defense trap card right here, directly from your deck to the field during the battle phase by attributing one of the tokens that you have on the board, and then immediately that turn it can be activated, and immediately that turn or the following turn you can actually go into the Egyptian God Slime. It's just another easy way to go into Egyptian God Slime, which is really cool. I'd say this card is probably like B tier. It's actually a pretty cool support card to play if you are playing the deck. It gives you easy access to either tribute fodder if you have an additional normal summon or additional tribute summon, or it gives you access to Egyptian God Slime in the following turn. And that effect to set the trap card into the back row is actually a quick effect, so that it actually is yeah, that's actually pretty nice because during the battle phase it's a quick effect, can be either player's battle phase. Yeah, that effect is actually quite good, so I'd say probably B tier. Next are the God cards. The God cards are a little tough to grade because I don't actually know how to grade them properly. I can grade them in the context of a God deck, or I can grade them in the context of them individually as monsters. Now, individually as a monster, let's start off with the commonalities between all of them. When the God cards are summoned, first things first, right off the bat, they are not as good as the TV show God cards. Not even close. They are just not that good. In the TV show, they had one weakness. It was like Pyramid of Light and Silent Magician. That's it. Nothing else could beat the God cards. They were essentially unaffected by everything. In real life, unfortunately, the only like protection that they have is that on normal summon, you cannot activate effects in response to the monster hitting the board, and you can't negate the summon. Meaning, you cannot Solemn Judgment, Solemn Warning, any of the God cards. Also, you cannot activate, for example, Torrential Tribute or Trap Hole, for example, on the summon of a God card. Now, the problem is a lot of those kind of protections are a little bit power crept now. Maybe in like 2010 that would have been good, but because of all of the power creep, that protection is almost is irrelevant now. Those are the commonalities between all of them. They all have that protection on summon. Also, Obelisk and Slifer can be special summoned, but Ra cannot be special summoned. It can only be special summoned with effects that like ignore summoning conditions. But these two can be special summoned without an issue. But these two get sent to the graveyard at the end phase, so you got to keep that in mind. This being Obelisk and Slifer get sent to the graveyard at the end phase. So even if you do special summon them, there is still a drawback. So now let's talk about their differences. Obelisk is actually pretty good. I'd say he's probably in B tier, just because I'm going to grade these individually, not in the context of their deck, because if it's just in the context of the deck, then Ra's the best because he has the most support. But as an individual card, Obelisk is probably one of the best. Obelisk has a base attack of 4,000. The rest of them have 0 until you do something with their attack. Obelisk just straight up comes out with 4,000 attack. Also, he's the only one that actually has protection. He can't be targeted. Now, that doesn't really matter nowadays because most boss monsters already have can't be targeted, unaffected by everything. Like, they already have that built into them. So it's not like a huge deal that he can't be targeted, but it's better than nothing, right? It is nice to have it than not. Also has another effect where you contribute 2 monsters and then destroy all monsters your opponent controls, and then Obelisk can't attack for the rest of the turn. I think that effect is a little bit of overcorrection because you're already tributing 2 monsters on top of the fact that you have to tribute to summon the Obelisk, and then now You can't even attack with this 4,000 attack monster, and if you special summon him, then he sends himself to the graveyard anyway. So there's a little bit of a frustrating situation there. I'd say, yeah, B tier is probably fair, only because his base stats are so good and he has some decent protection. Slifer, I'm also going to put in B tier. I think Slifer is actually quite good, because I actually might even, I almost want to put, yeah, Slifer higher than Obelisk. A few years ago, I would never have done this, but Slifer is actually the only one that has like a proactive floodgate effect. So he has two effects. Number one, Slifer gains attack, 1,000 attack for every card in your hand. That effect isn't like that groundbreaking. Obviously, if you have a lot of cards in your hand, it's, you know, you can have 5,000-6,000 attack. That's nice and all, but generally speaking, you're not going to hold that many cards in your hand. And then it has another effect where if your opponent summons a monster, you reduce that monster's attack by 2,000. And if you reduce that monster's attack to 0, then that monster gets destroyed automatically. And that's actually really good, because none of the other god cards actually do anything on your opponent's turn. Obelisk does nothing on your opponent's turn. It just kind of sits there, 4,000 attack. Raw is another story. He just sits there at 1,000,000 attack and doesn't do anything. And then Slifer actually does something on your opponent's turn. It's a proactive, almost like floodgate effect. Every time they summon a monster that is less than 2,000 attack, it's essentially going to be destroyed. It's almost like a Tiger King Wangu, which is actually, it's pretty nice. That effect is actually really, really cool. There's a reason to have a Slifer on your opponent's side of the field. There's a reason to summon a Slifer on your opponent's side of the field. There's a reason to special summon a Slifer on your opponent's side of the, on your opponent's turn, is what I'm trying to say. There's actually like a proactive effect on the card, which is quite cool. Now, a couple of the rulings you have to watch out for: if your opponent summons a monster with 0 attack, it does not get destroyed. This is something that I learned one time. Somebody summoned an effect veiler against me. If it can't lower the attack by 2,000, like if it's at 0 and the attack doesn't change, then nothing gets destroyed. But other than that, I actually think the effect is pretty good, and I wish there was actually more Slifer support, because he's one of my favorites. Now, here are the drawbacks for Slifer and Obelisk, and the reason they're not in like S tier. Slifer doesn't have any search cards. Like, there's no way to search Slifer, and there's no way to search any of the cards that search Slifer, and there's no way to get Slifer into the graveyard. I mean, obviously there's like Foolish Burial and stuff like that, and also you have the Jax Knight support that came out, and that searches Slifer, technically searches Slifer the Sky Dragon, but then you have to play all of the Jax Knight stuff just to be able to search Slifer the Sky Dragon, and I don't. That's another tier list for another day. That's really like the only way to search Slifer the Sky Dragon. It's a bit frustrating. And yeah, there's just no search card for this card. There is a search card for Obelisk, but it's like a graveyard trap card. And that's the biggest drawback with these two. None of their support cards are searchable. And to search them, you have to play very, very convoluted cards. It's actually quite unfortunate. Next is Raw. I'm grading Raw just by himself, not with his support cards. Raw is actually very bad. Like, objectively speaking, he is very, very bad as an individual card, because he can't be special summoned. He has to be normal summoned. And when you normal summon him, you have a few effects that you can do. You can pay life points until you have 100 life points, and then he gains the amount of life points that you paid. Now, you have to keep in mind, you have to pay until you have 100 life points. You can't be like, oh, you know, I don't want to die to like a 1 burn effect. I don't want to die to like a single attack. Let me not pay 7,900 life points. Let me just pay 6,000. 6,000 is plenty. I'd love a 6,000 attack Winged Dragon of Raw. That's plenty for me. It's a 6,000 attack monster. You can't do that. You have to pay until you have 100 life points. Then it has a second effect, and this effect is actually really good. You can pay 1,000 life points in order to destroy a monster that your opponent controls. That effect is actually not once per turn. You can get rid of 6 monsters if you wanted to. It's actually kind of crazy. If your opponent U-links you, you can get rid of every single monster that they summoned by paying 1,000 life points each. But the problem is, you just paid life points in order to make this guy have any attack at all. So the problem with this card is you either pay life points to destroy your opponent's board with its paying 1,000 life point effect, or you get to give him some amount of attack points. And this is, of course, a monster that you tributed 3 monsters to even get in the first place. So just as an individual card, Raw is easily the worst of the 3. But here's the truth. Raw has by far the most support. Even Raw has 3 search cards. Slifer doesn't have a single search card. Again, Raw has 3, and Raw has support. He has search cards for his search cards, for his other search cards. You can activate Guardian Slime's effect to search out the Sun God, and then you can activate that to search out Ancient Chant, and then you can activate that to search Winged Dragon. That's how crazy it is. The search cards search each other. It's outrageous synergy. Whereas this has absolutely no search card whatsoever. No way to get it into the graveyard. No way to mill it. No way to do anything. This has 1 search card on a trap card of all things, which is the soul card. 1 search card on a trap graveyard effect. Yeah, so because of all of the support, honestly, this deserves to be probably in like D tier, but because of all of the support, it's probably, I'd say it's probably like, I'd probably also put it in B tier just because of all of the support, because realistically speaking, the most competitive way to play a God deck is to play the Raw support, because again, he's got the most support. Next, we've got Winged Dragon of Raw Sphere Mode, easily an S tier card. It's one of the only cards here that actually sees meta relevance outside of the archetype. That is a big deal. Yeah, it's one of the only ones. It's seen meta relevance for years. Every single time the game of Yu-Gi-Oh becomes unhealthy, this card like rears its head. Because basically what it lets you do is it lets you normal summon or tribute summon it to either player's side of the field by tributing 3 monsters. So if your opponent has 3 monsters, even if the monsters are unaffected by card effect, it doesn't matter how the monsters got there. They can have three unaffected monsters, and each of them have unlimited negates. You can tribute all 3 of them, and then summon Raw Sphere Mode onto their side of the board. It can essentially break any board, any good board. It's like an outrageously good card. Easily S tier, probably the best card in the entire archetype, by far. Next is the Winged Dragon of Raw, Immortal Phoenix. This card is one of the most frustrating cards in the archetype. So let's just get started, right? This card obviously can't be normal summon set, but this card can only be special summoned if a Winged Dragon of Raw, we're talking about this guy right here, gets sent from the field to the graveyard while you have Immortal Phoenix in the graveyard. And then Immortal Phoenix basically special summons itself to the field. Now, what does Immortal Phoenix do? Immortal Phoenix is unaffected by all other card effects. He also can't be targeted by all other card effects, if I remember correctly, but I mean, that's irrelevant because he's unaffected anyway. And then he has an effect where he can pay 1,000 life points, not once per turn, and you can send a monster your opponent controls to the graveyard. Send, not destroy, send. Best form of removal in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is sending to the graveyard. Well, you know, banishing would probably be better, but still, very, very good. It sends to the graveyard. It doesn't target. It doesn't destroy. Really good. Now, here's the problem. You ready for this? During the end phase, you have to put this guy. During the end phase, you send this card to the graveyard, and then you special summon a Winged Dragon of Raw Sphere Mode from your deck. Yes, the one with 0 attack. You summon that back to your side of the field with 0 attack. This monster is so good. The Winged Dragon of Raw, Immortal Phoenix, is so good. The only thing that can out it is itself. I mean, it is so frustrating. It's such a great card until they put that last line of text. It's not even broken. Like, there's so many boss monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! That are unaffected by everything that it's frustrating that the one good God card is so heavily nerfed. It's really frustrating. It's already kind of hard to summon. It's already kind of hard to set up, and then on top of that, it basically nerfs itself, which is really frustrating. I'd probably say C tier is a fair place. Incredibly frustrating. Next is Guardian Slime. This is another card that's pretty good. So if you take any damage or any battle damage or effect damage, this thing special summons itself to the field. Has another effect where if your opponent attacks it, its defense becomes equal to the attacking monster's attack. So if your opponent has a monster with 8,000 attack, this card has 8,000 defense. It just matches the intensity. It's a great card. Also has an effect where it's sent from the hand or from the field to the graveyard. You can add a card that has Winged Dragon of Ra in its text. This is why Winged Dragon of Ra is the best for deck building. It has so much support. Now, one thing that I figured out with this card is if you take any damage whatsoever, even if you inflict damage to yourself, you still get to special summon it. So I came up with a little combo that you could do with this card, which is you can activate Assault Synchron, inflict 700 life points to yourself, summon this to the field. This is level 10. Assault Synchron is level 2. You can go into a level 12 Synchro monster, which you can go into the Math Mech monsters unaffected by everything. Summon that in your main monster zone, and then since this was sent to the graveyard, you can add the Sun God card, and then you can search out the Winged Dragon of Ra Sphere mode. You can search out Sphere mode. So you basically have this monster that's unaffected by everything. And on top of that, you have Sphere mode ready to go for next turn. So if your opponent makes a board, you Sphere mode them, and then since your monster is unaffected, the Math Mech monster, it's unaffected by everything, you can attack right through that Sphere mode. Also, the Sun God, the Rising Sun God, another cool part of the Sun God's effect is that since it basically prevents all monsters that are special summoned the same turn from attacking, so they won't be able to attack over your Math Mech monster. It's a pretty cool combo that I came up with. Overall, it's a pretty awesome card. I'd say it's probably, like, in terms of support for this deck, it's probably like A tier. It honestly fits pretty well in the deck. It gives you protection, gives you a lot of different cool things. Next is, I don't know exactly how to pronounce this card. It's Holasti. I don't know, but it's the Creator of Light. It's the Creator of Light card. It basically, the way to summon this card is you tribute the Winged Dragon of Ra, you tribute all 3 God cards in order to summon this card, and then when this thing hits the field, its summon can't be negated. When this thing hits the field, you win automatically. And here's the problem with this card. This is an OCG exclusive card. I've never played against it personally. It is not even on Master Duel, despite Master Duel being essentially the OCG. So I've never played against it personally. I don't think that this card has ever seen any meta like relevance whatsoever. I wouldn't personally build a deck around summoning this card, but if I had to grade it, I'd probably put it in like D tier. I think it's very possible to actually summon this. There's a lot of you have to remember, the Winged Dragon of Ra can't be special summoned, so you actually have to legitimately get 3 monsters and then tribute summon it. But actually, Slifer and Obelisk can be special summoned, so you just special summon these 2 however you need to. Whatever revival or, you know, milling that you have to do to get these guys back, to get these guys into your graveyard, and then you tribute summon for this. You tribute all 3 and you get this and you automatically win. I don't think it's a terribly difficult strategy to do, but it's not one that any of us can ever do because it's banned in the OC. It's not essentially here in the TCG. But that is the Light Creator. Next, we've got Divine Evolution. This card is, I'm going to put this in D tier. I don't think this card is very good. Basically, what this card does is you can choose a monster on your side of the field that's divine, or it's one of the wicked monsters, but the wickeds have nothing to do with what we're discussing right now. And basically what it does with these divines or wicked monsters is it gives them an effect where it basically makes them gain 1000 attack, and none of their effect activations can be negated. Now the problem is that's not really super relevant because none of these effects are like effects that need to activate. It doesn't matter if their effects are prevented from being negated. And then it has another effect where it gives your God card the ability where if you attack with it, your opponent has to send 1 monster they control, but they choose the monster, which is good because it can technically out monsters that are unaffected by stuff. But at the same time, since they're choosing, they can just choose their crappiest monster. Yeah, it's kind of the issue with this card. Honestly, it's one of those cards where it's a win more card. It's only good if you already have a God card on the field and you're already in a winning position. But it's generally not really all that great overall. I'd say probably D tier is fair. This I'd say is probably F tier. This is actually a wild monster appears. It lets you summon a level 10 or lower monster. It can't be normal summoned or set, ignoring its summoning conditions. The only thing that this applies to is the Winged Dragon of Ra. You can summon it, but one thing about Winged Dragon of Ra that you have to realize is, and then also I think you're locked into summoning, and your opponent, you can't normal summon or set any more monsters, and your opponent takes no more battle damage for the rest of the turn. One thing you have to realize about Winged Dragon of Ra, if you do summon it by an effect that ignores summoning conditions, one of the unfortunate parts of that is the Winged Dragon of Ra comes out at 0 attack, and since it wasn't normal summoned, its on summon effect doesn't activate because it was never normal summoned, it was special summoned. Its effect it doesn't activate, so it essentially comes out at 0 attack. The only thing you can ever do with that Winged Dragon of Ra is just pay 1,000 life points and destroy a card. So a wild monster appears, I probably wouldn't recommend playing it. Next is True Name, or yeah, the True Name. This card is kind of interesting. I'd say it's probably around like, it's probably low C tier. Basically what it does is you guess the top card of your deck. If you guess it correctly, you add the card to your hand, and you get to special summon a divine monster from your deck. So typically you're going to go into Slifer or Obelisk, since they can be special summoned. And then that effect is actually kind of cool. But the problem is guessing the top card of your deck. There's only one card in the entire Egyptian God archetype that stacks your deck, and it's the Sky God. That is the only card that stacks. It stacks Monster Reborn on top of your deck. It's the only card that does that. And most of the time, you actually just draw the card that you stack, so it doesn't even really help. Now, in a Dark Magician deck, I actually don't think this card is too bad in a Dark Magician deck. Like, if you wanted to make like a Slifer Dark Magician deck, I think it'd actually be pretty cool, because you can. Dark Magician always constantly like stacks cards on top of their deck, so you know what's on the top of your deck. You stack the top of your deck, activate this, add the card that you stacked, and then special summon like a Slifer the Scribe Dragon to your side of the field. Now Slifer is going to out itself at the end of the turn, unfortunately, but generally speaking, I think it's pretty cool. There are a few other combos that you can do with this. Like you can, there are cards that, like for example, Plague Spreader Zombie, that lets you put a card from your hand on top of your deck to special summon it from the graveyard. You can use that and then activate True Name and then basically have a guaranteed special summon. But again, it's just so out of archetype. There's so much going on. I generally would not play this in a God deck if I was building it. Next is Ancient Chant. I think Ancient Chant is probably like an A tier card. It's actually pretty good. Basically what it does is it lets you add a Winged Dragon of Ra to your hand, which is, pretty good. It's a search spell. It's nice to have a search spell. Slifer and Obelisk do not have that. And then on top of that, it gives you an extra tribute summon of a monster, which is pretty good because those do help. If you use some of your normal summons on like Reactor Slime or Ra's Disciple or something, it's nice to have an extra normal summon. It definitely helps. And then on top of that, this card has an additional effect where you can banish this from the graveyard, and then when you summon a Winged Dragon of Ra this turn, it gets the attack of the monsters that you tributed, so it does not come out at a base 0 of attack, which is really good, right? Because it comes out with some level of attack. Thank God. It doesn't just come out at 0. So let's say you tribute like Egyptian God Slime, it's 3,000 attack. When that Winged Dragon of Ra hits the field, it comes out at 3,000 attack. And then if you want to pay life points, well, let's say you have 7,900. Now that Winged Dragon of Ra is at 10,900 because you have 7,900 plus their 3,000. And you can actually OTK somebody by attacking whatever they have on board. It definitely helps a lot. Very good card. Very good synergy with the entire archetype. Very, very, very strong card. I wouldn't say it's so good that it's like generically good like these, but it's definitely a very good card. I'd probably say it's above the Guardian Slime, but it's obviously a very, very good card. Next is Mound of the Bound Creator. Mound of the Bound Creator is an interesting card because it gives protection from targeting and destruction to your God cards, which is nice, and all level 10 monsters in general. That part is nice. And then it has an effect where if your God card destroys a monster, if your God card destroys an opponent's monster, it basically they take 1,000 damage, which again isn't like super important, but why not do 1,000 damage than not. And then it has a last effect where if this card's destroyed by a card effect sent to the graveyard, you can add a divine monster to your hand. That is a pretty good effect, and it is generic, right? It can search any God card. The problem is it's just so specific. Like, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to activate this card and then Mystical Space Typhoon your own card so you can search a God card? You have, -2 in a deck that doesn't have amazing card advantage just to search one God card. That is not very good. I'd maybe play this as a one of. I'd probably put in C tier. Maybe as a one of. I wouldn't play like more than one because again, it seems like it could be very bricky. None of the effects give you any card advantage. It just gives you protection and possible searching. Next is a card I actually don't like very much. It's Millennium Revelation. This card's first effect is actually pretty cool if you're already playing a god deck. You can discard a Divine Beast monster and then search Monster Reborn from your deck. Monster Reborn is a one-of card, so being able to search it is pretty cool, right? You get to search it. And then it has a second effect. Since this is a continuous card, you can send this card to the graveyard and a Monster Reborn that you have in your hand to the graveyard, and then you can actually special summon a Winged Dragon of Ra from your graveyard, ignoring summoning conditions. Now just keep in mind that Winged Dragon of Ra is coming out at 0 attack, and this card during the end phase makes you send the Winged Dragon of Ra that you summon to the graveyard. So Winged Dragon of the Ra is hitting the graveyard no matter what you do. Very unfortunate. So basically this card, other than the first effect, which is actually kind of decent, being able to search Monster Reborn, the rest of it just essentially is just made to make up for the fact that Winged Dragon of Ra can't be special summoned. Like, none of that had to be... This card didn't have to exist if they simply just allowed you to special summon Winged Dragon of Ra. None of that had to be on the card. This card's not broken. Like, Winged Dragon of Ra is not broken enough to not be able to be special summoned, while the other two... Like, Winged Dragon of Ra is actually worse than the other two god cards. That's what's sad about this whole thing. It is actually worse than Obelisk and Slifer, but it just can't be special summoned. Like, it's such an odd restriction, and that's the only reason this card even exists. I probably put it in like D tier. I wouldn't really recommend playing this in a deck other than searching Monster Reborn. The rest of it's kind of nonsense. Next, we've got the True Sun God. This card is actually quite good. It's A tier, maybe even S tier. I'd say it's actually in a lot of ways better than Ancient Chant. This is all three of these cards actually, funny enough, search Winged Dragon of Ra support and Winged Dragon of Ra, whereas like I said, these other two don't have any support card like search cards. Basically what this card does is it searches on activation Winged Dragon of Ra or any card that mentions Winged Dragon of Ra in its text. So that includes all the spell and trap cards that Winged Dragon of Ra uses. It includes Raw Sphere mode. Like, if you were playing in a format, for example, where just a very, very toxic format where your opponent's just making full unbelievable boards, you can actually activate this card and search Raw Sphere mode. Like, you don't even have to be playing a god deck. This card is just good generically. You can search Winged Dragon of Ra in any deck that you want. Also, it has an additional effect where monsters outside of Winged Dragon of Ra cannot attack the turn they are special summoned. And that is essentially like a continuous floodgate effect, as long as this card essentially remains on the field. And a lot of opponents won't see that coming. Like, they'll keep special summoning, make a full board, enter battle phase, and then, oh shit, you can't attack. So it's actually really good in that regard, because it kind of like buys you some time. And then it has one more effect where you can send an Immortal Phoenix, this guy, the GOAT, to the graveyard from your deck, and then you can send a Winged Dragon of Ra from your side of the field to the graveyard, and then you can essentially, if you send this to the graveyard, you can send this to the graveyard from your field, and that will trigger the Immortal Phoenix to special summon itself to the field. So the Rising Sun God actually does so much for the archetype, right? It searches, it gives you a way to summon the Phoenix, and it gives you some protection essentially from battle, because your opponent's monsters can't attack the turn they're special summoned. So it's pretty good overall. It's actually a better search card than Ancient Chant, to be honest with you. Next is Blaze Cannon. This card is so weird. The first line of text of this card, if I remember correctly, it says this card is always treated as a Blaze Accelerator card. Why? Why is Blaze Cannon always treated as a Blaze Accelerator card? Blaze Accelerator cards are part of the Volcanic archetype. What in the world does Blaze Cannon, a Winged Dragon of Ra support card, have to do with Blaze Accelerator, the Volcanic archetype? Like, can anybody make that connection for me? What do these archetypes have to do with each other? The card overall is a pretty good one-of. Basically what it does is it gives the winged dragon of Ra on your side of the field the following effects, and it is a quick effect, which is also good because you can activate it during your opponent's turn or during your turn. This card's activation cannot be negated, so your opponent cannot do anything about this. And since it's a quick effect, you can chain it to stuff. So if your opponent tries to destroy your winged dragon of Ra, you can chain this card to that card. Basically, this card has 3 pretty good effects. It can make your winged dragon of Ra unaffected by your opponent's card effects. That is really good, right? Unaffected by everything is really good. It has another effect where when you attack with your winged dragon of Ra, you contribute any other monsters that didn't attack on your side of the field, and then you can make your winged dragon of Ra gain attack equal to the monsters that you tributed. Again, that's pretty good because you can make it essentially a ton of attack. And then it has another last effect where it has a final effect where you can, after damage calculation, if the winged dragon of Ra attacked, you can make your opponent send all monsters that they control to the graveyard, like all of the surviving ones. So if they manage to survive that battle phase, everything's gone anyway. Since you're making your opponent send the monsters, it actually can work against unaffected monsters, because again, they are the ones sending it. It's not you sending it, it's them sending it. So this card is actually kind of outrageous. And what's awesome about this card in Winged Dragon of Ra is you can play it as a one-of. You don't have to play 3 copies of it because it is completely and totally searchable. So I'd say it's probably somewhere around B tier. It is a completely, totally searchable card. It's very good. It's a very good one-of. It's something that's very good to enter into battle phase with. You can activate it from your hand since it's a quick play. You can activate it during your opponent's battle phase. The card is very, very good. Yeah, very strong card. Next we've got, I believe this is called Thunder Force Attack. Yeah, basically this card is, I'd say it's just okay. It's similar to the Blaze Cannon card. It gives Slifer the Sky Dragon the following effect, and it can't be negated, which is really cool, just like the previous card. Basically, you can destroy all monsters that your opponent controls, and then if you activate this card during your turn, you can draw cards equal to the amount of cards that you destroyed. Pretty good card actually overall, because if you activate it during your turn, you get to draw. If you activate it in your opponent's turn, you get to essentially like Raigeki them on their board. And then during the if you activate this during your turn, you can only attack with 1 monster from then on, which essentially you're going to just attack with that Slifer the Sky Dragon. Overall, I think this card is actually quite good. The problem with the Slifer support is it's just not searchable. So you have to play 3 copies of this card if you really want to see it. And if you don't ever want to draw like multiple copies of this card, because it is a hard once per turn, you have to play less than 3 copies. So you're in a very suboptimal position where you have to play so many that you draw it, but not too many, because you don't want to draw too many of them because they are hard ones per turns and don't do anything outside of that turn. Overall, I think it's actually a good card. Now, the other issue with this card is it is a win more card. It already requires you to have a Slifer the Sky Dragon on your side of the field. If you don't have a Slifer on the field, it doesn't do anything. Because again, you need Slifer. Without Slifer, this card is essentially a dead card, and it's kind of the problem with it. Now, overall, it's a very good card. Like, it's a very good card, but again, it's not searchable in any way whatsoever. It's one of the frustrating parts of trying to play Slifer. I'd say it's probably a C tier. This card can get a lot better if Slifer cards actually become searchable, because then you could just play it at 1, and it's like a searchable interruption / draw card that you can have access to whenever you want. Next is the Obelisk quick play card. So each of these got a quick play card. We've got the Blaze Cannon, Thunder Force, and now the Obelisk one is Fist of Fate. They're all named after the attacks that they had in Battle City. Fist of Fate is actually another one. I like the name, but that's about where it starts and stops. It has an effect where it's a quick effect. If you have an Obelisk on your side of the field, you can negate a monster on your opponent's side of the field, and then it's essentially like an impermanence. You can negate a monster in your opponent's side of the field, and then you negate all monsters with that same name, essentially for the rest of the turn. You can negate, no matter where they activate, graveyard, hand, deck, it doesn't matter where they activate, you negate them all. Which is not as big of a deal as you think, because it's just like, usually your opponent will summon a monster, activate their effect, and then you negate it, and they won't activate it again, because most effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are hard ones per turn. No one's going to activate a Luber 4 times in a turn, generally speaking. So, unfortunately, negating the same card over and over and over and over in the same turn doesn't really help you as much as you think. Now, if you are successfully negate that monster effect, and it's your turn when you activate this card, you can destroy all spawn trap cards that your opponent controls. It's essentially like a Harpy's Feather Duster effect onto the card. And I'll say this card is in the same problem as Thunder Force Attack. I don't think it's as good as Thunder Force Attack. I think Fist of Fate is not quite as good. It's got the same issue where the card is just not searchable. So you either play 3 and brick, or you play like 1 and never see it. So it's kind of in the same issue. I'd say it's probably like a C tier card. I think it's a good card, but again, it's just not easy to access whatsoever. And that's kind of the problem with the Obelisk and the Slifer support. Next is Soul Crossing. Actually, one of my favorite cards in the archetype. I'm putting this in S tier. It's one of the real big reasons that you want to play God cards. Basically, it lets you tribute 3 monsters from either your side of the field or your opponent's side of the field. You can summon a Divine Beast monster by tributing monsters on your side of the field or your opponent's side of the field. So it essentially turns every single one of your God cards into a Raw Sphere mode. Which is pretty cool. You can tribute their monsters even if they have a full board. And what's awesome about Soul Crossing is even if your opponent has monsters that are unaffected by cards, you can still tribute them because it gives the ability to summon itself to the God card. It works differently than a card like Lair of Darkness or a card like the Rika Field Spell, for example. It actually gives the divine monster in your hand the ability to tribute summon your opponent's board, which is pretty cool. It's it's actually a pretty cool. It essentially turns them into like a 3 times 3 kaiju. Now the only drawback to this card is you can only activate 1 card for the rest of the turn after you activate this card for the next 2 turns, which is not really that big of a deal because you're essentially destroying your opponent's entire board, and the card can be activated during your turn or during your opponent's turn since it is a quick play. Like, this card is very, very good, and I'd say it has the same issues that some of the other cards have, which is that it's not searchable whatsoever. You just kind of have to draw it. It just says Divine. It doesn't say Winged Dragon of Ra, so it's not searchable, unfortunately. But overall, I think it's a very, very strong card. If there's just more search power within this archetype, I think it could be a really, really good archetype. But I can't get away from the fact that is such a great effect. Next, we've got Breaking the Breaking Ruin God. This card is actually quite interesting. It's another Obelisk support card. Basically what it does is this card can't be negated, just like a lot of the God cards. Basically what it does is it can special summon Obelisk from your hand or from the graveyard, which again is like good and all, but like, how do you get the Obelisk into the graveyard? How do you get the Obelisk into the hand? How do you get this card into the hand? It can summon an Obelisk it can summon an Obelisk from your hand or graveyard to the field. And that card is unaffected by your opponent's card effects. That effect is actually pretty good because you essentially have an Obelisk that can't be outed. And this is a quick play. So you can summon this during your opponent's turn. And Obelisk has a really good attack. It has 4,000 attack. It has 4,000 defense. It's tough to out if it's unaffected by everything. How do you get rid of that? You have to attack over a 4,000 attack Obelisk. Not exactly like a super duper easy ask. And it can't be targeted. And it's unaffected by this card. So yeah, this card... that effect is pretty cool. On top of that, this card has a graveyard effect where if you tribute 2 monsters while you control an Obelisk, remember Obelisk has an effect that tribute 2 monsters to destroy your opponent's board. If you activate an effect that tributes 2 monsters, you can banish this card from the graveyard and then banish all monsters in your opponent's graveyard and inflict 500 life points for each monster they have in the graveyard. If you resolve that against certain decks, that is a win. Yeah, you have to banish 20 monsters in order to win, but sometimes you've already dealt 4,000 damage because you have an Obelis the Tormentor. You only have to banish 10 monsters to win the duel, so you can really make up some quick damage with that. And you get to banish your opponent's entire graveyard depending on what they're playing. That could be the end of the game right there if you banish everything in their graveyard. If they're playing a graveyard focused deck, that can really make the difference. Overall, I think this card is much better than Fist of Fate, like by far better than Fist of Fate. I guess the only issue that I have with it is that it's just absolutely not searchable. I'm putting this at the top of C tier. I think it's actually quite a good card. Yeah, definitely worth playing. If you're playing Obelisk, it's a no-brainer. You have to play this card. Next, we've got Dark Spell Regeneration. This card is an interesting card, often overlooked. Basically, what this does is when your opponent's monster declares an attack, which is already a terrible first line for a support card, because it forces like an opponent's battle phase to be when you can actually do anything. And then you can target a spell card in your opponent's graveyard and then set it to your set of the field. You can steal a spell card from your opponent if you, yeah, like I said, if they declare an attack. That in itself is like not that great an effect, because it essentially is really, really slow, and there's no telling if your opponent's even playing spell cards that are useful to you. Like, yeah, if they're playing, even if they're playing, like, let's say they have a Call by the Grave in the graveyard, by the time you get to resolve this effect, you're well past the point where Call by the Grave is even useful anyway. Next, it has a second effect where you can banish this card from the graveyard. This is a trap, but you can activate it during your opponent's turn. You can banish this from the graveyard and send a monster reborn from your hand or set on the field to the graveyard, and then you can special summon a Winged Dragon of Ra, ignoring its summoning conditions, from the graveyard, using the monster reborn, essentially. It kind of like cheats around it, and then you can target a monster your opponent controls and send it to the graveyard, and then during the end phase you have to send the special summoned Winged Dragon of Ra to the graveyard. Now, this effect honestly is not that good, because the Winged Dragon of Ra that you're summoning is coming out with 0 attack, because it wasn't normal summoned, therefore it doesn't get to pay life points to have any attack. It's coming out with 0 attack. And again, the other issue is that you already have to have Monster Reborn in hand, or it has to, yeah, you have to have the Monster Reborn already kind of like in circulation. It has to be in your hand or has to be set. If you don't have it, this card's just like totally useless. Stealing a monster, stealing a spell card from your opponent's graveyard, again, is like kind of useless. And on top of that, this is all on a trap card, so it's really, really slow. I definitely have to put this in like D or F tier. Like, this card is just not very good whatsoever. I'd say probably D tier is the fair placement for this. Next, we've got another card that's in the structure deck. It's called Level Resist Wall. Basically, what this card does is, if a monster you control is destroyed by battle, you can special summon a monster. You can special summon monsters equal to the level of the monster that got destroyed by battle. So this card is like somewhat interesting, because you can summon as many monsters as you want. You can summon 5 monsters. I recently actually lost to this very, very specific card. The video's up there. Basically, this card is a very, very odd card, but I don't actually think that this is very helpful in the archetype whatsoever. You have to summon a monsters that are exactly that level. A lot of the gods are level 10, so if they get destroyed, you can summon, like, I don't know, like 3 Ra's Disciples and like 1 level 1 monster if you wanted to, or you can summon like 3 Ash Blossoms and like 1 level 1 monster. Like, you can summon any of those monsters and their effects are negated, and I guess for the following turn you have tribute fodder. But I mean, the problem with this card is, again, you have to lose a big monster in order to get a lot of value out of it. But if you're losing a big monster, you're in a losing position, and it has to be destroyed by battle. By the time they get to the battle phase, oftentimes they already have negates, like, already in circulation. I just don't think that this card is very good for the deck, for a god deck. I wouldn't play it in a god deck personally, but I can imagine in like certain slowed down decks somewhere it can see its uses, but I don't think in a god deck I would play this card under any circumstances. Next is Soul Energy Max. This card's interesting because it solves the problem of some of the god cards of Obelis the Tormentor. Obelisk's destruction effect isn't a quick effect. This card basically, if you control is a trap card. If you control Obelisk on your side of the field, you contribute 2 other monsters, and then you can destroy as many monsters your opponent controls as possible, and then inflict 4,000 damage to them, which is really cool. So it's essentially like, it gets around the fact that Obelis the Tormentor can't attack the turn that it can destroy all monsters your opponent controls. It's like, I think that's a pretty cool effect, right? Because it makes up for the past of making Obelisk a little underpowered, because now not only can you destroy your opponent's monsters, but you can also deal 4,000 damage, which the regular Obelisk cannot do. That effect is fairly good. Then it has a second effect where you can banish this card from the graveyard, and then you can add an Obelis the Tormentor from your deck or from the graveyard to your hand, and then immediately after the card resolves, you can normal summon or tribute summon an Obelis the Tormentor. That effect is really, really good because it's finally a search card for Obelis the Tormentor, and it seems like Obelis the Tormentor has a decent amount of cards that trigger in the graveyard, and that part is actually quite cool. Now, here's the problem with that card. Again, Obelis the Tormentor, the only way to search it is this card, and this card has to use its trap graveyard effect in order to do it. So you have to play a card like Foolish Burial of Goods to send this to the graveyard to actually add an Obelisk to your hand, which forces you to play a card that is like outside of the archetype, that isn't searchable, that is a hard once per turn, and you have to play as many of them as you can so you can actually have access to your Obelis the Tormentor, and that is actually quite frustrating. I can imagine with the Ichizu cards where this card could have been useful, but again, Soul Energy Max is good as much of a card that, as much as I like this card, I just think Obelisk deserves a better search card than like the graveyard effect of a trap card. But as a card itself, I'd probably put it somewhere up here. It's like a C, maybe B tier. I think it actually is a good card, but obviously the raw search cards are like a million times better than this card. Now, the first effect is good, the second effect is good. Like, both of the effects are good, and I don't have any like particular issues with this card. I'm going to put it in B tier because I don't have any like actual issues with this card. It's actually a well printed card, but the problem is it's just Obelisk needs more search cards than a graveyard search card. It has no way. This card cannot be searched. This card cannot be searched. This card cannot be searched. There's no way to search any of the Obelisk cards whatsoever. So you have to kind of just draw these cards, and then on top of that, this card, Obelis the Tormentor, the only way to search is through a graveyard trap, which again is just not. It's not very good, unfortunately. Next is the Reviled Sun God. Now, this card is actually really good. This card actually is very strong. Basically, this card's effect cannot be negated, just like a lot of the other God cards, which is cool because it can't be ashed. But if you control a Slifer the Sky, basically you don't have to control a Slifer the Scribe Dragon. You can target a Slifer the Sky Dragon in your graveyard and special summon it. And then each player draws until they have 6 cards. And this is a really good card because if you went first and you put a Slifer the Sky Dragon in the graveyard, set this card, go to your opponent's turn, let them, because they have 6 cards in hand at the start, let them do anything, right? Let them do anything. Summon a monster, for example. You activate this, special summon Slifer the Sky Dragon back from your graveyard. They can't ash this card because it can't be negated. And then you get to draw 6 cards. Now, you used up your hand, right? Because you went first. But they have 5 cards in their hand. So your opponent's drawing 1 card, and you're drawing 6 brand new cards. Hand traps, all the rest. All different great cards. Your Slifer's at 6,000 attack. Every time your opponent summons something, it gets reduced by 2,000 attack. If it gets reduced to 0, it gets destroyed. So it's like a floodgate 6,000 attack monster sitting on your board, plus you went plus 6. That effect is bananas. It is really, really good. I honestly think this card is like in the S tiers. Again, the only issue with this card is just like it's not searchable. Slifer is not searchable. There's no way to send Slifer to the graveyard. None of the setup is there, but this card is actually legitimately a very good card. I would love to play a Slifer deck, but there's just so little support for Slifer the Sky Dragon. Like, let's say you wanted to play a Slifer deck. You've got this, Soul Crossing, Slifer the Sky Dragon, and Thunder Force. That is the entire deck. That's your entire Slifer deck. It's 4 cards, and none of them are searchable. So it's incredibly frustrating. It does actually have a second effect, which is also very good, which you can banish card from the graveyard and then place a monster reborn from your deck or graveyard on top of the deck, and then if you have a Divine Beast in your graveyard, you can draw a card. So essentially, if you have Slifer in the graveyard, you can banish this card from the graveyard and then draw a card. That is an awesome effect. That is very good. You essentially search Monster Reborn. Yeah, both effects on this card are very good. I can definitely, again, the only way to really get away with playing this right now is to play Branded Fusion and then send Slifer the Sky Dragon along with Fallen of Valbaz to the graveyard, and then if you have this card, you can activate it and then basically draw all those cards and then have Slifer ready to go on your opponent's turn. That is the only way to actually pull this off, unfortunately, but I think it's actually a very good card, and if they actually do support some Slifer support cards, by far this is going to be like one of the best cards in the archetype. Definitely an S tier, just purely how it's written. It's a very strong card. Next, we've got Metal Reflect Slime. I think this guy is like kind of like a B tier card. I'm going to put him right next to his compatriot here, the Reactor Slime, because this thing basically gets it onto the board. Basically, this thing is 3,000 defense. You drop it onto the board, and then it lets you make Egyptian God Slime because it's a level 10 Aqua monster that is also water. That's really the only use for the card, and it, you know, it has some decent defense, and it's a trap monster. It's a pretty cool card. I'm going to put it right here next to his buddy. Yeah, like I said, pretty cool, but not like outrageously cool. Next, we've got Sun God Unification, I think this is called. This is another one of those cards that like makes up for the fact that Slifer, makes up for the fact that Raw has all of these negative aspects to him. I'm going to put him right next to the Millennium card. Basically, what this card lets you do is if you have a special summon Winged Dragon of Raw, remember special summon Winged Dragon of Raws have 0 attack. You can pay life points until you have 100 life points, and then give that attack onto the Winged Dragon of Raw. So essentially, if you special summon a Winged Dragon of Raw, this allows you to use his on summon effect regardless. I don't think that effect is that good. It just makes up for the fact that the card is poorly written in the first place. Then it has a second effect where you contribute a Winged Dragon of Raw on your set of field, and you gain life points equal to the attack of that Winged Dragon of Raw. So if your Winged Dragon of Raw has 7,900 life points, you tribute it, and then you get 7,900 life points back. It's like a little tax refund. Yeah, I don't think this card's good. Again, it just makes up for the fact that the card sucks in the first place. And it's at this point, they're better off just retraining the card than coming out with all this dumb stuff to like how many cards are there that exist just to make up for the fact that Winged Dragon of Raw is poorly written in the first place? You've got the Millennium card. This lets you special summon from the graveyard. This lets you make up for the fact that you're paying 8 million life points, and if you special summon, you can actually pay the 8 million life points. Then we've got the dark, the dark spell Regeneration. There's another card that just makes up for the fact that it can't be special. Like, how many cards do we need to make up for the fact that Winged Dragon of Raw is not a well-written card? But yeah, it's just another card, just like all of the others. It's a one of, and what's good about the Winged Dragon of Raw archetype is that it is actually searchable, unlike the Slifer cards, so you only have to play it at 1. I would honestly not even bother playing this card. Yeah, I'd say probably leave it out. And then the last card we've got here is Ultimate Divine Beast. This is basically like an endless Call of the Haunted for Divine Beast monster. So basically what this card does is you discard a spell or trap card, and then you can target a Divine Beast monster in your graveyard and special summon it back in defense mode. And then this is if your opponent's monster declares an attack, which again is one of the really, really frustrating things about certain cards in the God archetype. So basically your opponent has to declare an attack on you. You summon a Divine Beast monster from your graveyard. You have to discard a spawn trap, and that is a very specific cost, and I don't like that because sometimes you leave a hand trap in your hand and you don't have spawn trap cards to discard because most of the time you set them or you use them. But you have to specifically discard a spawn trap card, bring back the Divine Beast, and then redirect the attack at the monster that you just special summoned. And then during the end phase, if you still control that Divine Beast monster, you can destroy all face-up cards your opponent controls that activated their effect that turn. This effect, I would say, is not fantastic, only because it requires your opponent to attack. Now, if this card's face down, you activate it in response to an attack, it's a decent card. But if this card is already face up, what moron is going to attack into this? Like, see, who the hell is going to attack into this, knowing that they're going to trigger this card anyway? I'd say it's probably like very, very, very bottom of C tier, maybe even D tier. As revival, I just don't like this as a revival effect. I would have rather have been you just summon the monster, you know, during your opponent's turn. You can target a Divine Beast monster in your graveyard, summon it back. Like, it would not have been broken. It's not searchable. It doesn't even matter. Honestly, I think this card is like overly nerfed for no reason. But yeah, that is the tier list. This archetype definitely needs some new support cards. We need a way to search Obelisk that is reliable. We definitely need a way to search Slifer the Sky Dragon and send Slifer the Sky Dragon to the graveyard. We need that. Yeah, this archetype just needs a little bit more love. I think some of the Slifer cards are really good, and this archetype is really close. Like, Slifer is really close to, like, almost being, like, a tier 3, like, a really relevant strategy. But it just needs a little more love. Thank you for watching. If you think I messed up on anything, let me know in the comment section down below. And again, thank you guys. La, 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 la.